All right, welcome to the Latest.com show. I'm Igor Darish. Joining me is a military vet and Latest.com senior political analyst from Pittsburgh, Josh Patton, and he's a 24-year veteran of the U.S. State Department and the author of We Meant Well from New York, Peter Van Buren. Well, we've been on a long summer hiatus, back for season 2, and just in time, there was 3 high-profile police shootings in the last week. One was a man whose car broke down and was not a suspect in anything. One was a man who was waiting for his kit to come home and was not a suspect in anything. And one was a wanted terrorist responsible for at least 10 bombs and 29 injuries in New York and New Jersey. Guess which one survived? If you guessed the guy who wasn't black, you've been paying attention. So last night we saw protests in Charlotte, and there are more protests today after police trying to serve a warrant to someone else shot and killed Keith Lamont Scott, who was reportedly sitting in his car waiting for one of his kids near an apartment complex. Scott was not a suspect. He wasn't the target of the warrant. He was armed, but it's North Carolina. It's an open carry state. And it's unclear exactly what the interaction was with police, but protesters are calling for an investigation into his shooting. His family says he was holding a book. Police found the gun, but no book. This comes just days after a video of Terrence Crutcher being shot by police after his car broke down was released. Crutcher is seen in the video with his hands up, not being antagonistic towards police, even as cops are heard calling him a big bad guy and alleging that he might be on something. Police say Crutcher reached into his car even though his window was up, and then one of the officers shot and killed him. And not only that, but then they just left him there to die. Not one of the officers is seen checking on him. No one seems to care about the man they just shot, who was unarmed, innocent, just needed help with his car. Even Donald Trump today ripped the officer that shot Terrence Crutcher. And if you're a police officer and Donald Trump is slamming you, you really fucked up bigly. But on the other hand, police searching for Ahmaud Rahmani, the man believed to be responsible for the bomb that injured 29 in New York City and the other explosives in New Jersey. He was found after a manhunt. He immediately opened fire on police. He injured 2 police officers, and he was shot, but he's still alive today. Sean King, the racial justice columnist for the New York Daily News, wrote on Monday, hey, can the cops at least treat black people as well as they treat terror suspects? Josh? Does he have a point?
In a narrative way, yes, he does. I think Ahmaud Rahmani is still alive mostly because of luck. I'm sure they, weren't sharpshooters shooting to wound rather than kill in a gun battle. I do think that was just sort of luck that he survived. However, I think the quickness with which he got treatment had everything to do with the fact that he was wanted for questioning. As you could see in the other 2 videos, in the one video and in the other story, there doesn't seem to be once the situation is neutralized, there's no sense of urgency in getting medical care to both any officers who are injured and also the suspect's person who's been shot by police.
Yeah, we see that.
So I think that
the Philando Castile video is another example. And when you see it on video, it's even more stark, just the complete disregard for the person's life.
So I think in that respect, though, that King does have a point in that, if can American citizens at least be given the same concern for their survival to the answers that these people have, the Terrence Crutchers of the world, the answers to the questions that are out there that they have, can that be treated as important as any answers to questions that Ahmaud Rahmani might have? I think is a fair sort of analysis of how we might be able to change the thinking around these events.
Oh, Peter, just think about the proposal that Sean King is. I mean, that sentence alone, asking police to treat black people as well as they treat terror suspects. Isn't that striking in 2016 to be talking about police this way?
It's absolutely shocking. And I think we want to pick up on a phrase that Josh used, which is neutral. He said when the situation is neutralized. And I think that's very, very important to understanding the difference between the shootings of these 2 apparently unsuspected black men and the guy who was shot in New Jersey, the suspected terrorist. These shootings, police shootings of these often unarmed black men, typically involve multiple shots, sometimes multiple officers, tasings. They involve people who are walking away. I think in the Tulsa case, the guy was actually walking away from the police. His hands were in the air. These are situations where that are neutralized, that are no longer a threat to life or limb on the police part. In the case of Romney, the terrorist, everybody stopped shooting once he was neutralized. I don't know how many shots the cops fired, but apparently it was not a couple of full magazines, to the point where he was dead.
No, they
fired enough shots.
Shot him in the arm and in the leg.
Yeah. Where the bullets hit, Josh is very correct. In a struggle like that, you don't have time to aim to shoot the gun out of his hand like in movies and things like that. The point is, they didn't fire 15 shots at him until he was dead. They didn't keep shooting until the situation was neutralized. And in this case, it took just 2 shots and we were done. In these other instances, and many of the other officer-involved shootings, we see rounds being fired long after the person, suspect or not, is no longer a danger to anyone. And that, I think, is one of the key differences, in addition to the sense of just let the son of a bitch bleed out on the street, who cares?
Yeah, one of the other things that activists have brought up this week is, not just the lack of media coverage, which it received very little, especially because it coincided with the terrorist attack, but, just the outrage the previous couple weeks over NFL players taking a knee. Josh, why do you think there's so much focus on protests and how people react to these shootings instead of the shootings themselves?
Well, I think it's because in order to responsibly talk about these situations, you have to know the facts. Because of the way the video is in with the Tulsa shooting, the helicopter spins around and the vehicle blocks sort of what Terrence Crutcher was doing the moment before he opened fires. Now, they said he was reaching in to his car, but if you look in the video, it's highly unlikely that the window was down. He could have been. It almost looks like he was walking to his car to do the put your hands on top of the car position that, people are sort of taught. But you can't, to speculate about that is sort of irresponsible to say that's what he was doing. So when it comes to the protest, though, and the motivations behind it, you can speculate away. Is Colin Kaepernick, does he hate America? Is that what it is? Is he just a spoiled kid who was taken in by a loving white family who, taught him the gospel of Reagan, and now he's, not respecting the proud tradition of this country?
Congressman Stephen King suggests that his Islamist girlfriend ruined him.
Well, either way, it's like fan fiction for assholes, because you can ascribe any sort of motivation and aspiration to what Kaepernick is trying to do. In fact, I think the reason we like the protests is because if we can shit on the protesters, we don't have to talk about the actual troubling matter of, police use of force and when it's appropriate to take lethal action in that sort of situation, because that's a shitty problem that's no fun.
Peter, do you think that's true? Do you think we prefer to talk about Black Lives Matter and Colin Kaepernick and all that to avoid talking about the things they're actually protesting?
To a certain extent, yes, absolutely. But I think it goes deeper than that. It goes into the question of, well, what do we really care about? Do we care about these young black men being gunned down? Because if we did care about them, we would have discussions. We would leave space for the facts that we didn't know at the time, and we would continue to revisit the killings where the facts were more clear, instead of just sort of relegating them to the back pages when the cop is exonerated. With Kaepernick, it's just classic stuff. Here's a black guy who isn't showing appreciation for the things white people gave him. The audience for the NFL includes a significant number of white people. The NFL has had a hard-on for the military forever and ever and ever, and somehow protesting anything is seen as not supporting the troops. This has all the red button, red meat issues. All you need to make it better would be Donald Trump standing behind, Kaepernick with his hand over his heart personally. As far as young black men getting killed, whatever, we got more of them, And the fact that every one of these black shootings, it follows such a predictable pattern that we've all come to simply accept. Well, we don't have all the facts. We're going to have to wait. The cops saw him reaching for something. Oh, my gosh. The cops said it was a threat to their lives. There'll be a long period where we're all supposed to forget about it that we'll call an investigation before either the charges will be dropped or a grand jury will fail to indict or blah, 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 blah. And in many cases, the cop is right back on the force, armed with a badge and sent right back out. In between, there'll be how many more? Now, we just don't care is the problem about young black people being shot down. And unless and until we care, there will certainly be more deaths here in America.
Actually, I want to jump on something Peter was talking about there, because the reason that I think we're focusing on the Crutcher shooting is because it's so blatantly, obviously a bad shoot. I mean, the facts and all that aside, there's pretty much no reason for her to be Officer Shelby to be shooting her firearm when her colleague is deploying a taser.
Okay, if Donald Trump is jumping in as the voice of reason, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward case.
Yeah, you're fucked at that point.
But when you get to the case of Keith Scott, where they say, "Oh, he had a gun," and there's no video, it's their word against the police's. It's easier to be like, "Oh, well, he was just a thug with a gun." And today on Latest, I just did a story about some video that was released from a 2011 shooting. I mean, 5 years it took for this to really be resolved. Yeah, and what it shows that this officer was not only he had a personal weapon that he didn't use but was carrying. That doesn't make sense.
He brought his own AK-47 to work.
It was like a Tommy gun magazine too. It was very weird. But then after he shoot.
Look under my desk, boss.
After he shoots and kills this guy who was fleeing, he did flee. He was fleeing the police, not complying with a stop. But after they shoot him, he goes in his duffel bag, gets something, and then he goes and sits in the car for. It doesn't really make any sense, and then he gets up and leaves. And the documents that were also found by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch show that the gun that was recovered at the scene didn't have any of Keith. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name. Smith. His last name is Smith. Anthony Smith, I think. Didn't have any of his DNA, but did have Jason Stockley, the police officers, on it. So the gun was planted. And so when they say the police recovered a gun and there's no video, I mean, you can understand now why, at least for people who deal with this more often than, say, people in just general America do, they know that this can happen. Cops can plant evidence. But for a significant percentage of America, who I'm sure intersects greatly on the Venn diagram of Trump supporters, police recovered a gun, case closed, another criminal off the streets, the system works.
The other thing that's important. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, is following on that. I mean, is to look back historically at these things. I mean, you can go rewind all the way back to the 90s, the Rodney King beating in Los Angeles, which is, arguably one of the first of these police incidents that was actually caught on video and brought to the public's attention. The record of the cops on these things is not very good. We saw that in Chicago, where the Chicago police fought for years to hide the video they had of a shooting of a young black man who was walking away, who was of no danger to anyone who was unarmed. And so I genuinely believe, as in the case there with the young man who was supposed to be reading the book, we're asked to believe, well, he was reaching for something. Oh, he had a gun on him. There's absolutely no credibility as an organization. It's important to remember, too, in Charlotte, where the reading guy was killed, that it was only, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, that the police gunned down another person under similar ambiguous circumstances. and the cop was let off. There's a point where you may not be able to say in any individual case with certainty that, hey, the cops shouldn't have done this. But in an aggregate, there's a pattern here that is just impossible to deny and really irresponsible to deny.
I mean, the Scott shooting is, first of all, it's very early. And yesterday we saw protests that were largely spurned by the fact that the girl saying that she was his daughter said that, well, he was reading a book. Police say there was no book, that he had a gun. I mean, if they found a gun, I feel like it's reasonable to believe them. Is one of the reasons that the conservatives and people who dismiss these protests lash out the way they do is because sometimes, people say things like, oh, he was reading a book when he actually had a gun, or when Michael Brown's friend said that he had his hands up and said, don't shoot, and that was later proven to be false. Does that give people ammunition then to dismiss all the rest of it? And do you think that maybe people should wait before they go and trash police cruisers in Charlotte to find out all the facts, Josh?
I think it does give them ammunition in that the media outlets that are concerned with projecting not just an image of objectivity, but one of like kind of neutrality, they will acknowledge those things. Like it matters when, the protest slogan, hands up, don't shoot. Like it matters that the one person they talked about didn't actually do that. The concept of that makes sense and is in line with what the aim of the protest is. So to harp on the slogans is just bullshit distraction that makes, to undercut the seriousness of the protest. And it works because, on CNN or the network news, when they're talking about this, they'll feel the need to mention that fact so as to escape, accusations of partisan bias. I think the real root problem in that and why these things sort of work and why it doesn't matter even if the news wouldn't do that, like even if those claims didn't really resonate with people on the fence, it's because there's this attitude in America that if you run afoul of the law, whatever happens to you, you've got coming to you. Like there's this vengeance that people have that they want to see, people even accused of crimes suffer from. Like they think if the New York bomber had died, people would have celebrated it and not given a second thought if they got the wrong Muslim dude. You know what I mean? And so that's I think what the problem is. That's what people need to address, whether it's, the liberal activists, the policymakers, or even the concerned press that wants to get people to understand what the issue is actually about.
I think also we want to separate out the emotional reactions of friends and relatives who've just seen someone gunned down in front of them, and those reactions may often be, spontaneous, and the studied lies of law enforcement. These are people who, if you get a guy who's out on the street and says, I just saw my brother gunned down, and he says something that isn't accurate, that's one thing. When you get people who are paid by the taxpayers to preserve, peace and carry out the law, and they've just gunned someone down, and they submit falsified police reports, they lose or delete or withhold video, or any of these other things. I think there's a big difference between saying, well, some guy on the street told something that wasn't true versus a cover up by law enforcement, or even a false statement by an individual law enforcement officer. That gap doesn't seem to be explored. It just seems to be this equivalency of here's what one person says, here's what another person says. Since we have two people talking, it must be objective, and then we're done.
Josh mentioned an interesting thing along the same lines about the punitive, like just the want to punish the people who run afoul of the law. It was interesting to see how Donald Trump and the Republicans addressed Rahami after he was caught. Trump went out and lamented the fact that this guy is going to get room service, which I imagine he means prison meals. Like, it's fair to say this guy is never going to be out of prison for the rest of his life, and he's lamenting the fact that he's going to get a lawyer and a defense, and we're going to pay for his housing. Lindsey Graham came out, basically said the same thing. He wants him labeled an enemy combatant. He doesn't want him to have Miranda rights. He doesn't want him to have constitutional rights, even though the guy's a U.S. citizen. He's lived here for over 20 years. And they just want to strip them up like the thing that the Constitution was founded on, from a guy who didn't even kill anyone. I mean, yeah, he's a dick. I mean, he should be punished, but doesn't it set a dangerous precedent to just start denying arbitrarily constitutional rights?
Precedent. I feel like I should come through the screen and bitch slap you, my man. I mean, we've got 15 years of this precedent. Let's look at what's happened in those 15 years to so-called terrorists. First of all, the courts and the Bush administration, the Obama administration have both asserted that in so-called ticking time bomb situations, there are no Miranda rights.
Yeah.
And so
we have been
in
in state of emergency for 15 years now. Like that is a fact.
Yeah. I myself have been very, very, very nervous. And the idea is that there was no need to provide Romney with a lawyer as long as the police invoked the ticking time bomb situation, which they could have here. Oh, where's the next bomb going to go off? So he didn't have to have a lawyer. Trump and Graham didn't even have to mention that. As far as any form of due process, well, that seems to be at the discretion of the president and others. I mean, send him to Guantanamo. There's no due process allowed there. And hey, let's take it up one more notch. Let's just blow his ass away with a drone, because we've killed American citizens overseas, most spectacularly Anwar al-Awlaki, who the guy in New Jersey cited as an inspiration in his martyrdom. We just killed him.
More
without any
spectacularly,
due process.
we also killed his 16-year-old son. Yeah.
Yeah. Collateral. The idea is that this abandonment of our constitutional rights and their applicability to people who commit terrorism, that's nothing new. Trump is simply, in fact, I'm not a Trump supporter, so save your cards and letters, friends, simply restating U.S. government policy for the last 15 years.
Josh, do you think that's fair? I mean, the al-Awlaki thing obviously is a interesting case. He was over in the Middle East, and he was publishing the propaganda videos, and without any due process, we blew up a U.S. citizen. But I feel like, I mean, most terrorists in recent past have died while committing their attacks. But we have this guy Rahami, who is getting a lawyer. He is getting a trial. The Boston bomber kid who didn't die, he was shot to shit, but he did get a lawyer. He is getting a trial. I think there's precedent for American citizen terrorists to receive the same constitutional rights as any other American now.
Well, terrorism wasn't invented on 9/11, 2001. I mean, up until that time, terrorism was a law enforcement problem. The FBI had actually a pretty decent track record at, if not getting to the bottom of what happened in various terror attacks, ranging from the 93 World Trade Center bombing, where they actually caught and convicted the guy, to the Cole bombings in the overseas naval base bombings in the late 1990s.
Yep.
I'm sorry?
Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City.
Right. Oh, well, yeah, that too. I was thinking more, though, the specific Islamic terror threat of it. And so I think that while Peter is absolutely correct that we have abandoned that sort of idea, I do think that it is somewhat preposterous to think that these American citizens are on the same level as Anwar al-Awlaki or anyone who traveled over to Syria as an American citizen and just wanted to get in the fight on the side of the so-called Islamic State. I don't think that. I think that's a much different level than, again, this Rouhani guy. They're only just getting into like his notebooks and what he was into. But if you go back and look at the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooter, he pledged allegiance to terror groups that were at war with each other. I mean, is there anything more fucking American than that? Like pledging yourself to a cause and not even understanding the goddamn cause. So I think that the fact that we are, treating this guy like it's a law enforcement thing, not like an enemy combatant, is a positive step in the right direction. And I think the fact that maybe Trump is saying that is in a way good, because it points out to everyone like, oh, maybe that is the wrong idea.
Peter, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that unfortunately the majority of Americans would probably agree with Trump, as they have agreed with the policies of the United States in this regard for the last 15 years. You know, these things exist on a spectrum, and Al-Awlaki is clearly on one extreme end of that spectrum. But I think we have to kind of do it better the more extreme the case is. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, these protections, you know, they don't exist for the easy cases. They exist for the really tough ones, the ones that are very, very challenging. You know, it's this, you hear these same things, and the law is actually much more respectful, involving pedophiles or terrible crimes that are committed against children or women. You know, you hear this chorus of, you know, hang him, shoot him, let him get raped in the showers, and what have you. And the law isn't written, you know, to be for the nice guy who makes a mistake. The law is written to protect everyone, and the challenging cases are the ones where they really are terrible people who did terrible things. We've clearly abandoned a lot of that. Now, whether Romney gets the treatment that the Constitution allows him or not, let's hope that he does. But there's no question that far too many people, and by that I mean more than one, have by policy not gotten their constitutional rights. And the fact that the United States may try to hide behind magically invented phrases such as enemy combatant or what have you, just raises the level of cynicism as we ourselves descend to the same levels that all these so-called bad guys inhabit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes from how we talk about terrorism, or even just how much we talk about terrorism. You just wrote today about, or a couple of days ago, about how over the weekend when we were all worried about the terror threat, there was 70 people that were actually killed while we were searching for this terrorist who killed nobody. You know, statistics have consistently shown you're much more likely to get killed by lightning or even a toddler with a gun. There's actually a pretty good chance you get killed by a toddler with a gun in America than you are by a terrorist. And yeah, I mean, that's 70 people that you wrote about. That's more than the victims of Pulse nightclub, San Bernardino, and obviously this weekend's attacks in New York that didn't kill anyone combined. I mean, that's put together about 68 people died in those terrorist attacks. That's one weekend in America. Why isn't the terrorist threat just hyped up by the media and politicians alike, like weapons of mass distraction, and stops us from focusing on the real threats like toddlers with guns?
Sure. I mean, first of all, you know, a weekend, we'll assume a weekend is about 48 some hours, 70 people killed in one weekend. I mean, that's better than, worse maybe, than 2 an hour. Now, I realize people take a break, you know, for shooting while the bars are still open. But I mean, the point is that that's not remarkable. That information was not splattered on every front page, nor did I see anything, did the FBI tweet anything out about that, nor were there any warnings. Those of us here in the New York area had our cell phones activated without our knowledge. At 8 a.m., it was blasted out a warning that there was a guy named Romney, you know, on the loose, armed and dangerous. But that's a good, you know, that's worth talking about, because the police actually raided the house and had him under arrest very soon after that warning was blasted out. That suggests very strongly that they had a pretty good idea who they were after and where he was at that time. Now, to get from where I live to where he was arrested, and, you know, by any means, Uber or your favorite subway, I mean, it would have taken forever. The chances that he was in my neighborhood, or that I was going to look out the window and, you know, see some guy whose name I didn't know, whose face I didn't know, you know, the chances were zero. So what you get is this constant, endless fear-mongering. Even though New York, which arguably has one of the heaviest security presences in any country, any city in the United States, even though all of that missed this guy, one bomb went off, nobody died by sheer luck. Another bomb was found by our, you know, army of zombie homeless people scavenging in trash cans. You know, even though all of this security failed, The response of the governor and the mayor of New York was to send 1,500 more law enforcement people, including National Guard, out on the streets.
But
There's something very wrong with this system.
the phone thing did work. We didn't. They didn't. I don't, from what I understand, they had been searching for him for like 15 hours beforehand. Didn't know where he was, but knew who he was. Blasted out the photo and the text message, and then the bar owner, where he was passed out, found him, recognized him from the media photos, and called the police. So technically, that did work. That was. I mean, it's not easy to find someone in the tri-state area that you're not even sure where they might be holed up, and they're obviously desperately trying to run away. How else would you have handled that?
Well, let's back this up. I mean, this guy, let's just stick with some very basic facts. Absolutely nobody got killed.
Sure.
The police knew who they were looking for, and they apparently had a pretty good idea where he was. But yet they sent out this sort of, hour of hate message to an entire tri-state area. I'm going to argue that in the 2.5 years that I've lived in the tri-state area and that I've lived in the United States, albeit some of that pre-cell phone, these kind of alerts just don't go out all the time. I would argue that a lot of the purpose of that alert was simply to keep everybody on edge, to keep the fear alive, and to try to make up for the fact that the entire security system that we've spent trillions of dollars creating absolutely failed, completely failed to protect us against this guy. His ineptitude as a bomb maker, and as I said earlier, our own homeless people finding these things in trash cans are what literally, protected us. So what are they going to do? They're going to say, oh, gee, we sort of fucked up. Better cut our budget by $4 trillion next time. No, they're going to say, oh my God, you better stay afraid. And that's what these messages are about. That's what all the stuff you see on TV is about. That's what you wait and see all the revelations that are going to come about what an evil bastard this guy was. There was some idiot on CNN talking about how his bombs were so sophisticated, they obviously couldn't have been made by somebody just, pulling a recipe off the internet, except they fucking didn't go off.
I think, that's an interesting line to draw. I think, yes, there are many in the media and many in politics that seek to fearmonger and keep you on edge and keep you tuned in and keep you voting, keep you giving money. I don't think it, Josh, do you think it's fair to say that the police who sent out the text alert were fear-mongering in the tri-state area to make up for their own inadequacies in finding the terror suspect? I think it's, in the pre-cell phone days, we would put the pictures on the TV and say, hey, can you help us find this person?
Well, in the other sort of argument against the text message alert I saw was that because it didn't include a picture, which the technology just doesn't provide the opportunity for, because it's a different kind of, it's not a picture message, it's just a text message. Because it didn't provide a picture, New Yorkers would get that text, look up, see a Muslim person, and just start swinging. And that also struck me as a little ridiculous, too. I thought it was interesting. I think if you compare this bomber and how they did it versus how they did it in Boston, I feel like that was a huge win. I mean, they went kicking through doors. You couldn't do what
they did in Boston in the entire tri-state area. That would just be impossible.
Of course not. Of
also,
course not.
New Yorkers wouldn't go along with it like the Boston people did, where they just hold themselves up in the house all day.
Right. My point is the reason it's probably because they couldn't do it in New York that they thought to use the text message service this way. But my point is it was a better result, because instead of people's, rights being violated, the guy got the alert, got on his laptop, put on CNN, probably heard the idiot that Peter was talking about, and was like, but wait, I do see that guy sleeping right there. So I thought that it worked out pretty well. I mean, Peter is right, though, that, since for some time now, these lone wolf sort of ISIS-inspired people are confounding the intelligence apparatus that has been built. I've heard some people arguing, and I don't know enough about it to to say that it's bullshit, but it feels like it could be bullshit. I don't know. But that since the NSA programs were shut down is when this sort of spate of lone wolf attacks started. Feels coincidental to me, but either way, something's not right in intelligence. But having just dealt with the NSA thing, you know, that's where does the, you know, who are we going to have that conversation, privacy versus safety? And if we do, is safety going to win? Because it kind of always does.
Well, can
let's
I just comment on that
back.
real quick? First of all, when we talk about lone wolves, I don't know why it's only reserved for like the Islamic terrorists. I mean, Dylan Roof was a extremist lone wolf who went into a church and killed people. The kid in Newtown.
Because we're talking about it in the context of
but those people
war
that just
fighting.
as much.
I mean,
but I mean, the war we're fighting should be against people like Dylan Roof as well. With Omar Mateen in Orlando.
The war on terror is stupid.
Right.
So
With Omar Mateen in Orlando,
be...
no NSA program could have caught him because he's a guy from Queens who worked as an armed security guard who waited until the very moment he was inside the club after he shot people to declare allegiance to ISIS. The same thing goes here. This guy wasn't affiliated with anyone. I mean, this is the same thing as like the teenagers that go into the high school and shoot up people because they're upset and people were mean to them. Same thing with Omar Mateen. Same thing with Ahmad Rahami. They're just older versions of the Columbine killers. How do you find that? I don't see how the NSA program would find them.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that they would have. I'm just saying that's the argument they're going to use to sell. That's how they're going to sell it to people to reinstate the fucking programs. That was my point.
Well, let's rewind a minute and talk about which programs have not, have supposedly been shut down, because I think that's really a misnomer. An awful lot of what the NSA was doing has just been sort of given new names. They're supposed to get warrants for certain things, but we know from leakages that the FISA court, which approves these warrants, approves almost, if not all of them. So I don't think there's been a substantive drop-off in the amount of information that the NSA has been gathering. In addition, I think the NSA is in a position to gather the information, could have been in a position. Let's take this guy in New Jersey, Romney. Okay, so he buys stuff online that he needs to build these bombs with. He journeys back and forth to Afghanistan and Pakistan, nothing suspicious there. His wife is in Pakistan. His father 2 years ago called the FBI and said his son was a terrorist. There's 8,000 surveillance cameras all over New York, which didn't see any of this ahead of time. I don't think we can argue there's an NSA program that was dropped that, had it been active, would have caught this guy. Look, we've been sold a bill of goods. We've been sold a false dichotomy between security and privacy. My emails are being vacuumed up alongside yours, and honest to goodness, there is no connection between me and terrorism. I really can kind of let everybody know that if the NSA wanted to save a few bucks...
That's brave, Peter. That's brave of you to say.
No, I really am. Let me give you another example. Right after 9/11, I was working for the U.S. government for the Department of State. And right after 9/11, I was making periodic trips back to the United States. I was in Japan. Because of the stupid way the government buys air tickets, my tickets were all bought for cash in Japan one way. I would buy the return flight for here in the United States. I was often only coming here for 2 or 3 days, so I had only carry-on luggage. I'm a single male. Boom, I got stopped by TSA every time. I finally went back and talked to the Homeland Security liaison at the embassy where I was working, who explained, well, you're tripping all the algorithms, man. You've got a single guy traveling with no luggage, buying a ticket for cash overseas. Well, the idea of trying to scoop up everything leads to exactly what it does lead to, which is we keep missing all this stuff. We keep building a wall to keep out ISIS from overseas, which is what we've done, a virtual wall, if you will. And we're ignoring the fact that these problems come from inside the United States. We don't seem to spend a whole lot of time and effort worrying about why people who have lived their whole lives in the United States, and we haven't touched on the Somali guy in Minnesota, seemingly turn against their quote-unquote own people. That seems like a much better question to be asking than whether the NSA should have even more authority and powers.
But don't you think that it's fair that to say that perhaps these programs, this virtual wall that you described, that's meant to keep out ISIS and terrorists from overseas, have helped prevent, what's going on in, let's say, Brussels or Paris, where these people are going over there, getting training, and then they're coming back?
Well, I mean, you play the prove the negative game there, and obviously that's a difficult thing. It's hard for me to imagine, given the way things work, that the U.S. government would not be trumpeting some successes in keeping out bad guys and giving us details and things like that. I mean, we'll allow that some percentage, can't be revealed because of national security crap. But I mean, sorry, I can't believe they wouldn't be announcing how proud they are. In addition, a lot of the people who are doing these terrible things in Europe are people who have lived there. They're not folks who hop on a plane from Syria, because you can't do that. And the people who are in Syria are not folks who are going to blend in well, even in the ethnic communities in Europe or in the United States. The reality of this is that dangers come within. The people who planned 9/11, for the most part, a lot of them lived in Germany, for that matter, before they came and spent a couple of years in the United States. Two guys this weekend who committed terror acts had lived here a very long time. The San Bernardino shooter, a long time. Pick however many you want, and none of these guys rode a camel in from Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan. We're defending against the wrong stuff. I just can't seem to get my head around the fact that the majority of Americans are so afraid of the wrong stuff.
Yep. That's a good place to end that conversation. Let's talk a little bit about the election. Last week, there was a full panic mode on the left. Hillary plummeting in the national polls, losing Ohio, losing Florida. Josh, is it still as bad as it was last week, or are things starting to even out?
It looks like things are leveling out. I would say that if the polls still look like this next week after the first debate, the Democrats definitely need to panic. Maybe they should consider replacing Hillary on the ticket. The thing that I think is most interesting, and I wrote this in an article on Latest today, was that after Trump pulled off a momentous sort of shift, because a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, we were ready to call the race, because he'd insulted the Khans, attacked Ted Cruz the day after his convention. It just was not buying any ad time. It was a complete shit show of a campaign. I will say this: no matter who wins the White House, Kellyanne Conway won this election, because she turned Trump around to the point where it's now, you could say, statistically tied. Hillary still has a slight advantage.
Some people would say that Roger Ailes had a lot to do with the Trump turnaround as well.
Yeah, Breitbart.
You know what? That's possible. That's possible. I think the main point to take away from this, though, is that Hillary had, with the Clinton Foundation stuff and then the FBI report being released, Trump, just reading from a teleprompter and not screwing up, that amounted to like the worst 2 weeks of her campaign. And Trump still wasn't able to knock her off the top. So I feel like if there's any silver lining for Democrats, going into the debate on Monday, it's the fact that despite everything going wrong for them, not even, in the health scare and everything going wrong for them, Hillary Clinton maintained a slight lead. Trump couldn't officially say he knocked her off in the poll averages. But other than that, everything's been bad news for them.
A lot of people would talk about one of Hillary's vulnerabilities as young people being unwilling to come out to support her. The problem seems, for me, is that they don't actually support her. There was a Quinnipiac poll last week that found that Hillary Clinton gets just 31% of the vote among people between 18 and 34, which is shockingly low, especially when Gary Johnson is second at 29. He's only 2 points back of Hillary. And Donald Trump's at 26, Joe Stein's at 15. That's less than a third of millennials' support for a Democrat against just a right-wing nut job. Why do you think that is, Peter, given that, obviously the other 74% of voters are against Trump? Voters under 34, that is.
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, most significantly is Bernie Sanders. A lot of those millennials were supporters of Bernie. Some of them were very emotional, enthusiastic supporters of Bernie. I mean, Hillary made a few smiles in their direction at the convention and then otherwise basically wrote them off, figuring that they'd be obligated to. They haven't. I think a lot of those millennials are more likely to vote conscience rather than out of the fear-mongering, there's that word again, that Hillary is promoting. I mean, Hillary is saying to a lot of her potential supporters, you vote for me or you're going to get stuck with Trump. I think millennials are more likely to take a stand for conscience, if you will, and vote for a third-party candidate. But this touches on, Josh is talking about, I guess, trajectory really is the issue here. What is Hillary going to do differently in the next 45 days or so? She is sliding in a lot of damaging ways. Trump is looking more professional, more, God dare I say it, presidential at times. What is she going to do differently? She won't put any of these scandals behind her, by which I mean she just has given up trying to even address them substantively. She keeps stumbling, literally in the case of her collapse on 9/11, into new stuff. You're welcome. Thank you. I'll be here all week, people. What is she going to do differently to turn this all around? She's already outspending Trump by, I think, a national average, something like 5-1. Yeah. On airtime and things like that.
50 to 30, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at the debate, what is she going to do? I mean, she's either going to sit there and be the policy wonk, lawyerly Hillary Clinton, which is not going to sway anybody. It hasn't for a year and a half. Or she's going to try to slug it out with him, which certainly won't work. I mean, you're not going to outdo Donald Trump on knife fights. What can she do to turn this around? I'm not sure. If I was advising her, I don't know what I would say at this point in terms of how she could pull some of those potential voters into her pool.
Well, all right, let's talk about the debate in a minute. I have a question about something else you said. So, I'm one of the millennials that this poll is talking about, right? I'm one of the 74% or 70% that won't vote for Hillary or Trump. At the same time, I'm looking at the other two people, and I'm like, why am I forced to, again, choose between the lesser of two evils? Gary Johnson comes off. I already disagree with him on so much of his policies, but now in the last couple of weeks, he's come off like a complete dunce. Jill Stein is just running one of the worst. I mean, she could be a double digits right now, but her campaign is just a disaster. She, for some reason, reaching out to like 9/11 conspiracy theorists and anti-vax conspiracy theorists and trying to, like, no, you don't need to do that. So now I'm looking, and now I feel like I have to choose between the lesser of four evils when I was already in a bad situation to begin with the main two parties. So I don't want to vote for a candidate I don't agree with, Peter, and yet there's four on the ballot here in New York that I don't agree with. I know you're voting third party. I'd like to know who you're voting for and why, because I don't know who I'm going to vote for.
I haven't I am voting third party, and that's primarily because I refuse to vote for the lesser of two evils when those are Trump and Hillary. I think both of them are very dangerous people and will be very dangerous leaders to the United States. I don't see them as that different in terms of reality. Hillary is obviously better spoken and comes off less of a nutter on TV. But at the end of the day, I don't know her policies are going to be that much different overall. Leaving that aside, the third party choices are not exactly who I wish I had in front of me. They're both amateurs. I'll say that with some affection, in the sense that they're not slick. They don't have staff that can advise them. They don't have polling.
I don't
even think
have it's a slick issue. Like, I swear, if it was Bill Well on top of the Libertarian ticket, and I've seen a lot of other people say this, especially on the Republican side, if Bill Well was on the top of the Libertarian ticket, that's a much more palatable ticket to vote for. Gary Johnson with his rock climbing thing and just, what is Aleppo? I'm not going to vote for the guy who doesn't know what Aleppo is.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to disagree with you. I guess if I had to try to spin it, I guess you kind of asked me to, but I mean, if I was if Gary Johnson had some media training and some advisors. I mean, you get taught how to not answer a question you don't know. And so, he could have come back with, oh, that's a very serious issue. It's something that I think needs a lot of serious study, and I've got people working on it. In fact, I'm going to be meeting tomorrow with my foreign policy advisors who are going to update me on the latest intelligence, and I look forward to getting back to you all that. Now, let's take another question over here. I mean, you can do that, but whether Gary has the brains to do it, we'll leave as an open question, but he certainly obviously doesn't have the training to do that. Same, with Stein, she's out there sort of looking into the wilderness for someone that she can, a group that isn't Trump or Clinton, and try to appeal to them, and it's caused her to do dumb things, as you said, by going for various conspiracy groups scattered across the internet. These people are amateurs. They're not good politicians. They don't know how to work the media. None of these four people are perfect. I'm trying to find a way to vote for the one I think might do a good job. I'm very well aware that a third-party candidate isn't going to win. At the same time, I think it's important, A, to vote conscience, and B, if none of us ever vote for third-party candidates, then, we really don't have to wonder why every 4 years we don't get high-quality third-party candidates.
Yeah, my conscience is...
I know the answer to that question.
Go ahead. Answer the question.
Well, I know the answer to I know why you keep the answer to Peter's last question. It's because there's elections more than ever for 5 years. I just want to because if everything else you want to have a third party, that's awesome, because more, the more the merrier. But in the presidency, the president alone, anything less than a person that's where everybody's winning states. Oh shit! And I'm really making a point too.
Yeah, just back up.
Is it better?
Yeah, just back up a little bit. I think we missed some of that.
Oh. Well, basically,
we have elections more than every 4 years. Yes. Then. Yeah.
So no third party's first office is going to be the White House. I mean, if there were 15 or 20 House representatives who were libertarians, do you think the debate commission could get away with leaving Johnson out of the debates? No, of course not, because it would be an actual real political party. I mean, Gary Johnson has to be listed as an independent on a couple states because they didn't even bother to run a fucking candidate in non-presidential elections. So this is just voter hipsterism. And I also don't think that when you're electing the only position that everyone in the country votes for, who the fuck are you to think that they should match your ideals in every perfect way? Eat my asshole. Because if you find one issue where you line up with the person for president, you should be like, well, fuck, all right, that's the guy, or lady in this case. So I do think it's ridiculous that the complaining about the lesser of two evils. In the election of 1800, Alexander Hamilton endorsed Thomas Jefferson, his greatest political rival, over Aaron Burr, who was a dude basically just like Trump. And he said, because the elections are, if we have to choose between two evils, let's pick the lesser of them. So the reason it's lesser of two evils is because it always has been. America wants to elect a boyfriend every 4 years, and then forget about politics. And that's the reason the two-party system sucks. The reason the government is in gridlock is because people only vote for president, and the country is run by almost everyone else.
Peter, is that true, or are you trying to vote for a boyfriend every 4 years?
I'm not even sure where to start on that. I mean, a lot of who's going to kiss my asshole, it depends a lot on, I'm going to have to reassess all four candidates under that new criteria. Alexander Hamilton, really, how can the bastard son of a whore and a Scotsman drop in an island in the middle of the Caribbean? There's questions that are really unanswered about Hamilton. I think, we really need to look at the election of 18 whatever and Millard Fillmore versus Chris Rock to really have the Jesus, Josh, how much time do you spend preparing for all this? Look, Of course, we know that no presidential candidate is going to be exactly, us. We all make trade-offs, and we all, in fact, look to issues that are important to us out of the universe of issues. I mean, is it the domestic economy? Is it foreign policy? Is it women's rights? Is it same-sex marriage? Right. So we all pick issues that matter significantly to us, and those combine sometimes regionally. But the concept of lesser of two evils just rankles me as someone who believes in democracy. I'd like to think that we can all find things that we find positive in a candidate, not necessarily the whole bundle, and vote for that candidate based on those positive things, as opposed to simply saying, well, let me look through the catalog and figure which of these things I really don't want the most, and then grab something else off the shelf. I don't think even Hamilton would think something good about that, but just you wait. That's from the musical too. I'm just throwing that out there.
That was very good. My daughter will think you have won this argument.
Yeah, well, but I got to give you credit.
You made more actual Hamilton references.
Well, I'm going to save the rap for next podcast. But I mean, I got to say, earlier in the podcast, when you said fan fiction for assholes, and then tied that together with a critique of my political views by saying which one is going to, kiss your asshole. I mean, man, that's.
I may have said eat, but I was being colorful. I was being colorful, Peter.
Oh, I was kind of at that point, sort of, drifting into imagination for a moment. So I apologize for not quoting you accurately. I guess a bad time to mention I'm not wearing pants. That's why we only show us
right
here up.
All right,
I thought that was the rule.
Oh, yeah. It is.
We were going to preview the debate, but we only got a few minutes left. So instead of a full preview, I'm just going to throw this out. We know Donald Trump is going to call Hillary something. What is it? What do you think he calls her on the debate stage, Josh? What do you think he pulls out of his hat that can rival the things that he said about Little Marco and Lion Ted? Or do you think he flat out calls her a bitch?
Well, here's the thing. This is what I think might happen. I think he's gonna do something.
You're breaking up again.
Where he talks, and what he trails like is what it is. But he'll be like, I was gonna say secretary. I mean, geez. I think I think. Yes, he will call her a bitch.
No question. I think the only question is really what the over-under is on what point in the debate he will call her a bitch. I mean, the smart money's on. I think right now it's about 6 minutes in, but anything can happen. I think he's going to needle her, and I'm sure a huge part of her pre-debate preparation is going to be trying to figure out with her advisors, how best to respond to that. If she doesn't respond to crooked Hillary, Trump will just keep on it. He's like a freaking pit bull with that kind of thing. If she does respond in some like calling him Dickhead Donald or something, she's going to look bad, and she's going to go right into the cage match with him. I suspect there's an army of writers out there looking for draft the right response for her, and I'm kind of excited to see what it is.
Perfect.
I will say this, though. I think that with it being a one-on-one debate, if him just hammering on her for like 90 minutes, that will play way differently with just one person instead of with other people to play off of. I feel like that could change the dynamic in a way that is advantage Hillary.
Perfect. We're going to check back next week and talk about that time that Donald Trump whipped out his dick on a debate stage. Thanks for tuning in, and keep reading and watching Latest.com.